This podcast is brought to you by Odoo. Thanks to them for sponsoring this video. Get your first app free in the link in the description. And it is also sponsored by CDkeyoffer.com. Use offer code BrokenSilicon to save 25% on all Microsoft software. We'll talk about these sponsors more later, but for now, let's just get on with the show. Welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, actually, hopefully launching this week, Lunar Lake Tom. That doesn't make sense. That was a horrible opening, but we're going to leave it in. We're going to keep it. Dan, how are you doing?
We're good. I guess this week I'll be on Shelved by March, Dan.
Shelved by March. What is,
on Shelves by March.
Okay. I didn't even properly give you the ability to introduce yourself. I mean, This is terrible. I apologize. I want to apologize to my family. I want to apologize to the listeners. And I want to actually not apologize to Gerard for making him edit any of this, because I think we'll just leave it all in. So your lucky day, Gerard.
Well, for the affront that you just did to me, I'm going to just officially say last episode of this podcast, I'm doing out.
This is just not up to your podcasting quality standards, and this is the exit.
I expect to be formally introduced every time I'm on. I've been on, what is this? I'm not going to do the math right now because I don't feel like it, but 140-ish times. Don't feel like doing it. I could have just, by the time I've done that, I've already solved. It's 138 times.
And then you just post your own takedown video that's like, but you have to understand that culturally I come from this, where if you're not introduced properly, it is a great insult. And I know that's what Tom was trying to do.
Oh, I mean, we can dig into a lot of affronts that some insane people on YouTube seem to do.
Everything is just the most horrible insult you've ever seen.
I don't think that's ever happened with you, as far as I know, but some big YouTube channels get some interesting orbiter channels, is I guess how you would put it.
Orbiter channels? Yeah. It's bound to happen eventually. Like, I mean, once you get to a certain size, you get to a point where, like, there's enough views to be had just by talking about what you're talking about, which I always find interesting, because it's like, we talk about AMD, Intel, NVIDIA, Apple, PlayStation, Xbox, but it's like there's so many different subjects we can pull from to try to make an episode interesting. It's like the size you have to get to where, like, there is a Joe Rogan podcast reaction podcast is wow.
Yeah, there probably is some of those, aren't there?
I believe there is, and I think some of them are actually pretty popular, relatively speaking, to other podcasts. But anyways, let us move on first, of course, to corrections. These are things that you guys are telling us we got wrong. PRTDBNME writes in, this isn't really a correction, but it's kind of in that vein of thought, so I thought I'd throw it in here. He says, when will game developers and gamers sue Microsoft for the Series S for false advertising by saying it is a 10 gigabyte console? Well, in reality, it's 8 plus 2. NVIDIA was sued by gamers for the 970 3.5 gigabytes, so we should call the Series S an 8 gigabyte console too. And I put this here because I actually think this is important to address, because that isn't true. I mean, I certainly have my issues with how Microsoft configured the Series S. You can see it struggle to run a lot of AAA games right now, but they didn't lie about it having 10 gigabytes. It does, and it's not like the 970 where you could see games, or I guess you might even say the NVIDIA drivers. Like, this is what one of the things that really propelled the controversy forward is they found that a lot of games, you have a 980 here, a 970 here running the same game, it would go out of its way to only fill up 3.5 gigabytes and then page to the DDR instead, whereas it would happily go to 3.9 gigabytes or something on a 980. And that's because NVIDIA knew it would lose a lot of performance. It's not like, oh, this was 10%. It was like, I think some testing I saw showed that, like, it was maybe a little better if it went to 4 gigabytes on a 970 than if it went to DDR, but it was kind of effectively the same situation where you're cutting your frame rate at least in half the second you go over that buffer. It's not really the case with the Xbox Series S. It's just built to do it that way. You could argue you could be a little faster if you could fit it all in the 8 gigabyte section. I think some games might try to do that, but it isn't the same thing.
Is it 8 plus? Is it 8 for the system and 2 for the graphics card? If I'm
No,
remembering correctly,
remember, it's like they have a I think 128-bit memory controller, and then it's like, remember, but that means like 32, 32, 32, 32, and like one of the 32s or something has double the capacitor. I don't remember exactly what the configuration is, meaning that accessing it equally can't really happen, and really that portion of the RAM is really running at half the speed because of that.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess I can see where the comparison comes from, but I don't know. The 970 situation was a true big debacle where you almost just didn't have that half gig on your graphics card.
And they literally lied about how many ROPs were in the graphics card. Literally.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that too.
So I'm sorry. I think it really is a different situation. Would it have higher performance if it had unified 10 gigabytes, or really what I think there was an option for unified 12? I don't know if it was unified, but they looked into doing 12 gigabytes and they could have been unified 16 gigabytes. Sure. But that's just the performance. It's not like the same as if it didn't have that RAM. It would be far lower performance if it was the same setup as a 970. Mm-hmm. TMC Payton writes in and says, in Broken Silicon 275, during your PS5 Pro discussion segment, you mentioned the Series X doesn't come with a disk drive anymore. The statement is lacking the context you provided in your recent YouTube video. There are 3 versions, actually, of the Series X, of which 2 come with the disk drive, the 2 terabyte and the old school 1 terabyte Series X. And I don't think there's really any evidence that the original 1 terabyte black version with a disk drive will be discontinued. So, number one, I take issue with this a little bit because I outlined the different versions. Like, I'm aware what versions there are. But number two, I disagree. I think that if they announce a new model without a disk drive, they announce no plans to add a disk drive to it, and the new 2 terabyte console is called a special edition, to me, that telegraphs they're probably going to remove the disk drive almost entirely moving forward and just have limited runs of the 2 terabyte or something. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe in 2 years, they'll still be selling the 1 terabyte, but that seems like a really redundant product to have next to a $450 edition. And I'd suggest the only reason we would even see that is because they aren't even selling enough of them to get rid of the 1 terabyte stock. So I agree to disagree on this one. I think them announcing a new $450 digital is them saying, once we run out of stock with the other disc model, especially the 1 terabyte model, it's gone. I just think that is what's going to happen.
I mean, I think there's a chance that the Series X with the disc drive is just going to sit on shelves for so long that could effectively be their stock for the rest of that Series X's run.
Sure.
And yeah, that disc driveless version for $450 is a soft attempt at doing a price drop to me. Like, maybe there's slightly more demand for this thing if they sell it for $450. I don't know why you would keep selling or keep manufacturing at least the disk drive Series X at this point. And the fact that, like you said, the new one that is $600 says, like, well, I don't know, maybe there are people that are willing to spend more money if we give them more storage, but I don't know. That also seems like a kind of misguided product. I guess if it's just limited edition, whatever. But
yeah, again, they say special edition. Maybe they'll keep making it. I don't know. The way I look at it is, if for some reason the 1 terabyte were to sell, I don't know, I guess they could continue to do more runs of it. But if it were to vanish, I just find it hard to believe they're not just going to try to nudge you towards the 2 terabyte to get a disk drive and then try to have you get the other ones at the bottom. This is just what it looks like to me. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, that is the corrections. I guess now we can move on to the first story here with story number 1. Intel stock jumps on plan to turn foundry business into subsidiary and allowing for outside funding. All right, here's the write-up. Last Monday, Intel announced a flurry of news, presumably forming the first steps of a longer-term plan to turn the flailing company around. First, they are raising cash and dropping projects in early development. They announced another CHIPS Act award of $3 billion in direct funding, and they are directly selling a stake in Altera, which is being prepared for a spinoff IPO, and to curtail long-term far-off investments like Intel's fab and packaging projects in Germany and Poland. Next, there's also been some odd restructuring. The emerging segments of auto and edge have been somewhat confusingly moved into the client consumer group, that is odd, while silicon photonics are to be assimilated into the DC AI data center and AI group. The latter is also confusing given Intel has a dedicated networking section, which would seem a more fitting home for such products. But speaking of next, its new focus is to be on telco market, which is usually seen as part of the edge market. The organization, it just seems weird. Now, third, Foundry. Undoubtedly, the biggest announcement in all of these Intel announcements in the past week is that Intel Foundries is being separated into a subsidiary, offering greater transparency in costs and designs fabbed at their plants. This is not a full separation, at least not yet, but it does make such a step easier in the future. Notably, Pat Gelsinger said in a letter announcing the plans, to quote, "Importantly, it also gives us future flexibility to evaluate independent sources of funding and optimize the capital structure of each business, which implies possibly selling off stakes of Intel Foundry." This is not without precedent, by the way, as a 49% share of Intel's Ireland-based Fab 34 has already been sold to asset management firm Apollo to raise funds. And so finally, how has this impacted Intel stock? Well, the news has received positively, notably with a 6% uptick in Intel stock price. But as analyst Barsha writes, while the recent developments might excite investors, Intel still has to showcase its ability to shore up its financials. Out of the 36 analysts covering Intel stocks, 2 recommend a strong buy, 1 recommends a moderate buy, and 30 recommend hold. 1 recommends a moderate sell, and 2 recommend a strong sell. Overall, almost a complete, if not a complete tie in overall consensus for holding the stock. Yeah. In my personal opinion, just me speaking here now without the write-up, this also just seems more like necessary cost cutting to me to stay afloat. I wouldn't consider anything here solved until I see at least a year of solid execution and growth. So yeah, this is actually some pretty big news that dropped. What do you think of it, Dan?
I mean, it seems like Intel's preparing to be a more nimble company, which I don't know. I think in the long run that worked out for AMD. So hopefully it works out for them. I don't know if we're going to see Intel's foundries get sold off yet, but this definitely sounds like they're preparing to do that in a more clean way than they would have had they not spun it off as a subsidiary. Or I don't know if spinning it off is the right way to put it. I don't know.
Separated it or something.
Yeah, separate it. I'm very curious to see how long term the stock holds because this happened last week, if I'm remembering correctly, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I'm curious.
Right before we posted the episode.
Very curious to see if this is just a small bounce or if this is an actual will actually sustain a growth in their stock. I'm also interested to see how this will like impact their future financial statements, as this sounds like Intel's foundries are actually both sides of the company will have to be potentially more honest than they've been in previous calls.
Yeah, and when I look at this, I guess I can make an argument in 2 ways here. They announce all these changes, including making their foundry services a subsidiary of Intel. And I think you saw a lot of funding from the U.S. government come in, almost like they were telling them, we're not going to fund you until you separate this. Like they were making some deal here. So I'd say that's a positive point. Like maybe Intel is finally making the changes necessary to get more funding. But on the other end of this, I would go, I don't know. When I look at this, it's just like they're just selling off parts of the company to stay afloat. This to me doesn't look like anything's been fixed. They're doing what's necessary, not something that's like, wow, they've really turned things around. This is what you do to stay alive until you can turn things around.
Yeah, I mean, everything Intel's going to be doing for, I would guess, for at least the next year is just them trying to stay afloat. Like they said that in their previous market call. Didn't they basically say expect the next one to be worse than this one? Like,
yeah, I mean, a lot of people expect that at least.
The one thing I can say with that, though, is at least Intel's starting to get to a point where they're acknowledging that there's an issue.
Yeah.
And I don't know. That's somewhat optimistic versus how they've been for the past, I would say, 2 or 3 years. Like, where they come out every time they talk and they act incredibly optimistic and they never meet any expectation they set for themselves. Just being honest and saying, yeah, this isn't right before it gets light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, we're not about to see the light at the end of the tunnel. This is a gonna be a dark period for Intel.
I think what you're reaching for right now, I think it was a quote by John McCain who said, "It is always darkest before the dawn, but also when it's always darkest, before it gets darker." Which I love that quote because it's always like, well, things are bad now, but that means they'll get better.
Not necessarily.
We don't know when things will get better with that attitude. And if you don't do anything proactively enough, it's just going to keep getting worse. And so, yeah, I mean, it looks like Intel's trying to stop that from happening. But I just worry I don't know if it's too little too late, but too late to make the change that would be required for them to truly turn around quickly. I mean, again, like when Pat was hired, he hired the 20,000 people he just fired. Like they should have done cuts then, sold off some stuff then so that they were doing well sooner and more nimble sooner. And it's like, I don't know. I guess we'll just see how this turns out. But again, that quote by Pat, he's basically saying, wink, we're kind of preparing to sell off Intel Foundry or divide up as a company. And every analyst I talk to behind the scenes, it's just like everyone's like they're gonna have to sell off some of their fabs. They're under capacity, and until they get massive contracts, and even if they did, they're putting a lot of their stuff on TSMC now. They just need to get rid of some of these foundries, even if kind of like I think what happened recently with like Global Foundries, like even if they paid someone to take their foundry, because if they're not using it, it's just costing them so much.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it does seem to me that like they hired Pat Gelsinger at the wrong time, and I'm worried that they're even going to need an even bigger hatchet job CEO than they could have had if they would have just accepted where they are coming. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, this is very big news. We'll see what happens with this. I also saw a lot of people talking about how like Intel lost the bid for the PS6. Guys, I have no doubt that they might have bid on it, but everyone I talked to at AMD and Sony, like there was no like truly serious bid for the PS6. There was for the Xbox though, but we say Wintel for a reason. That's not really that as much of a surprise that Microsoft was talking to Intel for a project. I don't think they ever got remotely close to winning the PS6. I think they got somewhere with the Xbox, next gen Xbox, though. I don't know if that's misreporting. I'm only one person with some of these sources. I can't say. I think that came from Reuters that they were wrong, but that's just no one was serious. I never heard anyone seriously talking about a PS6 bid. Did they bid for it? Yes. No one was this might happen.
I'm sure every one of the companies makes a bid, at least flirts with making a bid for every one of these big consoles. But I wouldn't be surprised if even like the PS7, if we're still on traditional consoles by the PS7, which I don't know why we wouldn't. I wouldn't be surprised if like the PS7 and PS8 were even still on AMD, if they, depending on how their graphics department is doing, though.
All right. Well, let's move on to story number 2 then. And just to preface this, usually this would probably be a wrap-up, Dan. I mean, it's one quote from one person about the pricing of one product behind the scenes. But my BS meter went crazy on this, and I did some research. And I really think that what I think is really the more accurate narrative people should be hearing from this is what I'm about to present. So without further ado, GPD quoted as alleging Strix point costs double Hawk Point. Here's the write-up for that. Last Friday, Hong An-Fu on Twitter noted that representatives of GPD stated that a flagship variant of Strix cost them more than twice as much as a high-end variant of Hawk Point. And as usual, the clickbait rags ran with the idea that this means that Halo will undoubtedly be price gouged. And this writer thinks people may be missing the forest for the trees. Now, don't get me wrong, AMD will likely charge a premium for their, frankly, premium Halo APU. They will charge more for that than Strix, I'm sure, or Strix Point. But that is a 40 compute unit, was at 2.5 times the compute unit's 16-core product that is premium. It's going to compete with $3,000 MacBooks. And also consider the following. A cursory search for laptop pricing demonstrates that an AI9 370 laptop with 32 gigabytes of RAM and 2 terabytes of storage and a 4060 costs $1,660. All right. And then I looked for a comparative one. A vastly inferior Ultra 9 Meteor Lake laptop with half the storage still costs $230 more. Now, I looked for a cheaper Meteor Lake system and I found one. That one cost $1,280, but it was refurbished. And then I found a Hawk Point APU laptop, again, comparative specs, that's $20 less, and it's not refurbished. It is new, And again, I would choose Hawkpoint over Meteor Lake. I'd say it has better specs, at least ties it. And again, the Meteor Lake system refurbished still costs more. So you can consistently find high-end Hawkpoint systems and even $600 laptops that have touchscreens as well. And do you see my point? As far as we can tell, AMD isn't overcharging for Strix. They are simply selling Hawkpoint for budget pricing. All evidence suggests that Intel is charging similar pricing for Meteor Lake compared to Strix, likely because it does cost the same to manufacture, and monolithic Hawkpoint, with its small die, is just cheaper and being sold for cheaper prices. So I don't know if you saw that headline, Dan. What did you think about that?
I mean, Hawkpoint was supposed to be kind of a stopgap thing, and yeah, I mean, it's it's their budget option at this point, or it's one of their budget options. I don't know why people would be shocked to hear that the 370 is being sold for more than Hawkpoint. It really seems like a mountain out of a molehill story, especially given that, yeah, Meteor Lake is still going for more than
it's just ridiculous
than Halo. I mean, not Halo, Strix computers. Yeah, this seems like getting worked up about this makes zero sense. Like, yeah, this will go in $2,000 computers, and Strix Halo will probably go in $3,000 computers, because that's what Strix Halo is. It's
or 2,000 without a graphics card, of course, which you won't have one. So I don't know. I would say 2,000 to 3,000 most likely, but I wouldn't be surprised if over time it was like in the same pricing categories of 4070 and Strix Point. I don't know.
I mean, it's going to be 16 cores, 40 compute units. That's quite an SoC there. Like that's a full dedicated graphics card replacement GPU. That's not entry level graphics at that point, or I guess depending on how who's defining entry level, maybe it still is. But
and remember, from what I've heard, it also might use 3 nanometer for the IO die that has the graphics on it. So it might even be like a better RDNA 3.5, even and the extra compute units. But each compute unit's also quite a bit better.
Like, yeah, that's going to be a premium chip. I don't know why you would think that would go into like $1,500 laptops or something, or $1,200 laptops. And I don't know why you would expect a Strix Point CPU with a GPU to go into something for $1,200 likewise. That's not what this is. Now, it would be cool if like there were to have like Strix Point chips in like a $1,200 system, but I don't know, with a 460, yeah, it's going to cost around $2,000.
I think there might be, by the way. I think there might be $1,200 ones. So I don't know. Again, this just really annoyed me. And I thought I had to include this as like a main story here after doing the research myself. Because, you say, oh, Strix Point costs twice as much as Hawkpoint. Right. But it really doesn't seem to cost more than Meteor Lake. If it does, it's not much more. And Hawkpoint seems to be being sold for at least notably less than Meteor Lake most of the time. And so when we look at what Lunar Lake laptops will look like, just seems like actually no, AMD is pushing a pricing advantage here. It's just they're pushing it harder on the low end, and that's why Hawkpoint's so cheap. Which again, I mean, some of these Hawkpoint laptops, I think some people are like, well, it's budget, but it's like this is a 14-inch foldable touchscreen, 1 terabyte 2-in-1 for $630. That's, I mean, that they would charge $1,500 from that 4 years ago.
Oh yeah, that's honestly probably a good enough system for most people.
Yeah. And whether you want it to be a laptop or you want it to be a tablet, it has all of these next gen features. So I don't know. I thought that was annoying. Lonic Royer writes in, is there a good chance that AMD is going to be using N6 for budget products for a few more years? To me, it'd be smart to use it for the low end and cheap devices. I mean, just off the top of my head, my old roadmap I leaked of APUs showed Rembrandt and Mendocino being used through 2025. So yeah, I mean,
oh geez,
yeah, I mean that's an old roadmap. It's from a year ago or 2 years ago, but yeah, and I think other roadmaps that have come out from other leakers since then have pretty much showed the same thing. So yeah, I mean, it's like if I open this roadmap here, Dan, it's obviously a Fire Range, Strix Halo at the top, and then you have Strix Point, then Kraken, and then Escher below Kraken. They seem to suggest. So that's interesting because I'd almost wonder if you'd just get rid of Escher at a certain point, but who knows? Escher might actually be an even more budgety version of Hawkpoint than we realize. And then below that, there's Rembrandt. So if you see Hawkpoint right now in $600 laptops, it really wouldn't surprise me if you start to see these, Zen 3 Plus APUs in like $400 at some point, and Mendocino in $300 and $200.
Yeah, that's almost getting to a point where I don't know what those CPUs would go in anymore, though. Like, if Hawkpoint's already drifting down to 600,
It's true.
That's 600 is close to the bottom of the market, really.
Yeah. I don't know. The only thing I could think of is like, what if there's like a 5050 or a probably more likely 8500M XT, and you could just bundle that with Rembrandt for $500. That's like the most budget gaming laptop you've ever seen in your life. That'd be but even then I'd go, yeah, but would it be $50 more, $100 more to just give you Escher or Kraken? Probably just go with that, wouldn't you think?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, at least on the roadmaps, they say they're going to keep selling them, if anything, for volume reasons. But it wouldn't surprise me if, like, the client market had a downturn in sales, if AMD was like, I don't know if we need to make these anymore. And I don't know. It's hard to say because you almost wonder if they should make, which I haven't heard they are at all, like a really budget version of RDNA 4 on 6 nanometer. But I don't know. I think it's getting to a point where, yeah, I don't know, where it's probably the same price anyway. So, yeah, they'll use it for some things. But, also remember they're using 6 nanometer for the IO die still. So,
yeah,
that's something they can use that for a lot of that capacity as well. And, let's be honest here. AMD likes selling PlayStations. The PS5 is 6 nanometer. There's an argument to be made. Just let them use it for that, guys.
Yeah,
that IO dies, that might be enough.
I don't know if I don't think any or at least many new designs would be on 6 nanometer, unless we're talking the IO die.
No, I don't think so anymore. It's just, especially like what TSMC's announced N4C, which is like a cheaper 4 nanometer that's actually better than the original 4 nanometer. We'll just use that. I mean, it's probably worth it.
They have 3 different versions of 4 nanometer now, or 4?
Yeah, well, and I think they're pretty much going to be replaced by the high end and then the N4C. Mm-hmm. But again, remember, the N4C is not only cheaper, it's actually better than the original 4 nanometer that was used. So at that point, you're probably getting to a density where it's just cheaper to use that than 6 nanometer anyways, when you take into account the lower cooling cost, the smaller die. So yeah, I mean, they'll use 6 nanometer for a while more, but I actually would push back on if they should really use it any longer than next year. I don't think so. I think it'd be just too old at that point for most things. The AMD does, at least.
Yeah.
This piece of content is proudly sponsored by Odoo. Odoo is a one-stop shop for managing basically all of the annoying parts of your business. They have apps for accounting, sales, website building, and much more. Like, for example, if I wanted to make a new blog for Moore's Law is Dead, it is very easy to do with Odoo. You just start with a few prompts, choose a style, confirm what you'll use the site for, and then boom, it just throws several options together in front of you and you go, yeah, I like that one, and then you are off. Just like that, I had a blog where I could talk about decisions being made by Pat at Intel. And if I want to add images, they have a whole roster of easily searchable images that you can pull from to put on your website. And they even have something called Copywriter AI, where they will take what you've typed and hone it and make the wording more persuasive if that's what you want, saving you effort sprucing up your stuff. And you know what? That was free. That's right. Your first app is free for life with unlimited hosting for that website, free support, and the domain you choose is also free for a year. And with that same email address, you can create multiple databases, meaning multiple individual websites that don't need to be connected to each other as well. So if you're interested in checking out Odoo, follow the directions and the links below to get the best deal on it. And remember, that first app you use is free, and clicking on that link below, just doing even that, helps the channel a ton. So support Moore's Law is Dead by checking out Odoo today. QH Freddy writes in, has AMD conditioned us too much for mid-gen price drops? Yes. I think so. I mean, I think when you look at Hawkpoint launching for like $1,200 laptops, now it's in $600 laptops. And again, if you got a Hawkpoint laptop for $1,000 or something when it came out, it's like, well, it's probably still priced more competitively than the competition. So you weren't stupid per se. But it does feel like, especially on desktop, like we're just getting into this point where it's like, we just all know everything's going to be cheaper in 6 months. So why would we get Zen 5 at launch, even if it was delivering with the performance it should have? And it almost seems to be now.
Especially when you deliver a product that underperforms so much that it almost feels like it should be cheaper than some of the last gen counterparts. I mean, I don't know if we've been conditioned too hard for it. It just seems that's what keeps happening. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it would be better if they just more regularly release their things for like $30 to $50
Yeah,
cheaper at
like
launch.
just give us the price you know it's going to be, and don't launch it till it's ready. Like again, we're so beating this dead horse, but yeah, Zen 5 should have launched, I don't know, this week or a week ago, running far better and more consistently, and it should have been like, I don't know, 600, 450, 350, 250. And now everyone's going to wait until it's 200 and 300 and 400. And maybe if they would have just been that little better, they wouldn't have to do that. But I don't know. Again, beating a dead horse. NVIDIA seems to have figured that out. AMD still hasn't. Dead writes in. He says, regarding Mendocino, is there any news about its replacement yet? And if you know of any reason why 99% of Mendocino laptops come with LPDDR5 and thus no way to upgrade it from the paltry 8 gigabytes that are usually coupled with it. That just seems to be a trend in laptops in general, to be honest, that they're soldering the RAM or putting it on the SoC or something, putting it on package. It saves space. It's more efficient. And they think most people don't upgrade RAM. I would say if you want an upgradable system moving forward, fire range type stuff is probably what you're going to want to get. And yeah, I mean, what I would say about a successor is I saw this question on the script, Carbon Cry put it there, helping with that. And I went, Sonoma Valley, I know was the successor. I heard about it. God, I think before Zen 4 was out, a long time ago. And I always remember being told by the people that confirmed the codename to me that they were always like, I don't know if it will come out because I don't see it coming out in the next year or so. So far, they were right. It didn't come out soon. But I Googled Sonoma Valley. It's popping up in the rumor mill. So I don't know. I think there's a chance it's still coming. Yeah. And upgrading laptop RAM, I don't know, man. They're kind of removing that over time for most types of laptops.
Yeah, it seems like OEMs for some reason prefer it if you don't have the option to upgrade RAM by yourself. I have no clue why they would like that, Tom.
Yeah, I know. The only thing you could hope is but I was going to say someone like Mini's Forum seems to almost charge linearly the price increase of adding the RAM, which is nice of them. At the same time, though, they use just DDR5, so it's easy for them to switch it out. I don't know. So, all right, let us move on then to story number 3. AMD Strix Halo naming rumored to be Ryzen AI Max Plus 395. Quoting Tom's Hardware here, Golden Pig Upgrade Pack, a well-known leaker, has published preliminary details of the potential configurations of AMD's Ryzen AI Max 300 Halo processors, which are expected to be released in early 2025. In addition, the leaker revealed the official name of these CPUs with an ultra-high-end integrated Radeon GPU. Indeed, the leak confirms 3 SKUs for AMD and their partners chose to split Halo into. Comparing the options AMD pitched to OEM partners, leaked to us by April, they went with the 2 better options from the Halo Best variant. They have the Max Plus 395, the Max 390, and the Max Better option, the 32 Max 385. Oh, I see the joke Carbon Christ making here. The best, better, and it's like because they, these roadmaps we've leaked where it's just like ultra premium, premium elite, and then they'll finally say mid range. Like all of these are named like flagships, even though it's 3 different products. But anyways, I guess that makes sense. Halo is designed to offer unprecedented APU performance, and cut down variants will face more pressure from Arrow Lake and even Strixman products. While these cut downs may shine in niche specialized products, it makes sense to focus on the maximally enabled SKUs. Right? It's also worth noting that we see nothing here with Halo low power yet, or anything below 32 compute units. Although I've heard they use 3 nanometer for the IO die, so it wouldn't surprise me if what's it supposed to be like 350 to 400 millimeter squared total or something? Like if you remove the 2 chiplets for the CPU, you're getting to like a sub 300 millimeter squared 3 nanometer die. I don't know how much of that really needs to be cut down, to be honest, people. Anyways, though, the naming does seem silly. But AMD arguably had to continue the Ryzen AI shtick. Although if Golden Pig is to be believed, we already see AMD changing it yet again, as Strix Point included a name, AI9HX, and now they're moving to Max at the top because they ran out of single digits. They're at 9. At this point, when I look at both AMD and Intel's mobility naming schemes, I just throw up my hands and go, whatever. That is where I'm at, by the way. Whatever. I don't know. What you're doing. Whatever.
Well, Tom, Intel went with the Ultra naming in their new thing. So
It's true.
AMD had to one-up them and say Max, because I think
You have an Elite. What's better than Elite? Ultra. What's better than Ultra? Max. It's Max.
It's the biggest.
At a certain point, it feels like these companies are turning into like, I want 5, like 2 kids arguing 2, no 4, no 8, no 2, double whatever you say.
Well, and Tom, though, I don't think you realize this. AMD is brilliantly pre-parrying the next attack from Intel, because they already added the plus.
You're right. They already added the plus. Again, it's like, and I want. Oh no, it's the wish things. I want infinity wishes or double whatever you say. Like it's 2 kids arguing, where they just say higher numbers back and forth.
Well, I'm waiting for next time around when Intel goes with like ultra squared infinity or something like that.
Right, and that's where like it's like, I hate you 100, I hate you 1,000,000, I hate you double whatever you say, I hate you squared whatever you say.
Love stupid naming schemes, but I don't know. The SKUs all look pretty good to me.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to really say. But do you agree? I mean, it's like whatever they say Panther Lake's naming will be, I guess will probably be like the 388V. I just go, all right, I don't know. These naming schemes have no consistency. I'll just look it up on AMD's or Intel's website, I guess.
Yeah, they both seem committed to the idea of their branding being completely impossible to figure out what they're doing at this point. And I hope they don't carry that over to desktop, but they probably will.
Yeah, I mean, again, I've heard they may merge with Medusa. So we'll see if all of a sudden we have AI 400 late next year, 2026 with Zen 6. Minus writes in, how did they make the name longer while making the numbers smaller? By breakthrough engineering at AMD's PowerPoint divisions.
I mean, the PowerPoint engineers at both of these companies are really, they're working overtime.
They are working overtime, yeah.
I think we need to stop treating them so flippantly, Tom. PowerPoint engineering is a real skill. I don't know. I think I just convinced myself everything we did back there was wrong. We need more PowerPoint engineers.
PowerPoint lives matter. QH Fred, I'm not doing the AI thing. QH Freddy writes in, honestly, the cringiest part of the new CPU naming schemes isn't that everyone is slapping AI in it. Is that everyone is slapping words like Max Pro, Ultra Plus, and whatever else in the middle of the name in an entirely redundant way. I really agree. I do not understand this like Ryzen AI 9 HX. Why is HX here?
It's like
it's not even the highest product. There's the 375.
Yeah, I don't get it. It's like they're somebody in their marketing team is like, well, we need to keep HX there because that in our previous branding that spelled the best, even though that's not really what it was. That was just the high power designation. But I don't know. Maybe that translates to best. But we also need our new SEO name integrated in there. So there's like 7 different monikers on every CPU now.
Let's just cut the shit. If you want the SEO, let's just put like the Ultra 9 AI, the best one better than Intel. So if people search for it, that's what pops up. Or put Intel versus AMD comparison in the name. So that just pops up on YouTube searches.
Fortnite Black Myth Wukong.
Yeah, like let's just do it, AMD. I mean, AMD, that's what you're doing at this point. So
AMD has interestingly called it the Ryzen AI Max Black Myth Wukong CPU.
Yeah, I think that's the GTA 6. How funny would it be? 6. But they like the GTA 6, just hoping like it somehow gets picked up by the algorithm. All right. Well, after a bit of clowning on AMD there, let us now move on to something I think far more interesting. With story number 4, early Intel Lunar Lake review suggests competitive performance with Strix Point. All right, Lunar Lake is, as of today, finally kind of out. That's right. After a last-minute delay a few weeks ago, we are finally getting some early data on how this thing performs. Now, to be clear, we aren't holding back this episode to wait for hundreds of reviews to come out, as I personally feel it will be a week or so before we even have that many reviews. I'd want more than just the day one review days to come out. But in the meantime, I can communicate that the Fox, friend of the channel, told me over the weekend, who is testing Lunar Lake right now, that it has very competitive battery life. And in some scenarios, it does impress in many apps. So I'm happy to disclose that here after the embargo today, that I already know ahead of time that Lunar Lake is competitive, right? Without saying any specifics from him, of course. So look for his review there where he actually gets into some. And also that we have an early review from YouTube channel ThinkView that actually does have some data and demonstrated the following about Lunar Lake. So number one, it is flat out less efficient than the competition in multi-core workloads, even compared to Phoenix with a Z1 Extreme. Seriously, even at 15 watts, you would be better off with Hawkpoint doing multitasking in terms of efficiency. And Strix just blows it out of the water by 40 to 60%. Again, not just performance, but in efficiency at the same power consumption levels, all the way from 15 to 40 watts. In fact, a 38 watt Lunar Lake still can't beat Strix at 15 watts in his testing. However, Lunar Lake does win threading handily against Strix, although it doesn't seem to beat the M3 in his testing. And in gaming, it seems like it does trade blows, but not beat Strix and iGPU, which we're going to have to wait for more reviews to come out. I think some will find the Battle Mage tile in Lunar Lake better, but a suspicion I've had the whole time is Intel said 16% higher performance than Strix integrated graphics, and some early preliminary tests kind of just showed them trading blows, and I have a suspicion they're basically the same integrated performance if you don't cherry pick, is my guess. However, I will say this, the battery life is impressive. If you correct for the much smaller battery capacity in the Lunar Lake configuration ThinkView had, Lunar Lake seems to come out completely on top against both AMD and Qualcomm, although it must be noted that depending on the usage, it does feel like these are within 10% of each other. So I don't know if this is some skull-crushing win in efficiency, but it is better, seemingly firmly better in light usage battery life. And speaking of configurations, it must be noted that ThinkView used a nearly top of the line Lunar Lake, a nearly top of the line Strix, and a second to the top Lunar Lake. They used the AI9, HX, as we've just covered, 370, and then the Lunar Lake one, I believe, was the 268V. There's a 288V above it that would give you probably 3% or 2% higher performance. So if you have a problem with that, yes, I guess if you consider the 370 the best one from AMD, add 2% to the Lunar Lake results. I don't think it really changes much. Also, there's the 375 from AMD, so technically there is a stronger one out of them. But it might just be for AI, so I don't know. I think it was a mostly fair comparison, though. I doubt most laptops have the 288V. But anyways, there you go. Lunar Lake looks to lose in multi-threading, including multi-threading efficiency, to Strix, but predictably firmly wins in single threading, including single threading efficiency, and trades blows in iGPU performance while managing a tad better battery life overall and non-intensive usage. Is that impressive? Well, Intel is using more advanced packaging and a more advanced node to basically achieve a tie. But at least it isn't a loss like Meteor Lake was versus Hawkpoint. So yeah, that's something. And let me say one more time, this is but one review informed by Hurley little nuggets from the Fox, is early testing. I understand more reviews are going to come out from around Lunar Lake when this podcast drops, but I don't think that's enough. I think especially with Intel launches, especially Intel laptop launches, you need a week or two to really see everything, and then we'll cover it there. But I think we kind of know enough to talk about it with some authority now. Dan, what do you think of Lunar Lake?
I think it's about as good as we were speculating it would be a couple weeks ago. Like, I mean, they're going down from 22 threads to 8 threads from Meteor Lake to Lunar Lake. So obviously it's not a multi-threading beast, but it's pretty good single threading. It's pretty good efficiency for specific apps. I mean, I think if it's put in the right laptops, this is a pretty good launch. I mean, it just needs to find the right laptops. Like the laptop that was being used in ThinkView's piece, I think like perfect form factor for Lunar Lake. Like little mini PC, not mini PCs. What are they called?
Truly thin and light laptop.
Yeah. And yeah, that for, I don't know how much that's going to go for. I think that could sell pretty well. Yeah, I don't know. Competent launch by Intel, mostly it looks like.
Yeah. Well, at least in terms of how Lunar Lake performs.
At least performance.
We'll
who
see
knows
what happens with availability and stock and so on and so forth. Maybe I'll even message a source here right now and see if I can get any extra nuggets here about Lunar Lake. But let me see here. I just want to see, can we get some freaking pricing here? Ultra 7 Series 2. Yeah, all right. This looks right. Yeah, $1,400, $1,700. Maybe I'll have Gerard put this on screen here too. So
We'll see.
16 gigs, 16 gigs. I don't, it doesn't, 16 gigabytes at $1,700.
Yeah, I don't know how these are going to be received. I'm looking at the Lenovo,
Okay.
the Yoga from Lenovo with I believe the Ultra 7 258 is going to be $1,400. I don't know. I don't know if that's good enough.
Yeah. So again, on paper, when used properly with one of the better Lunar Lake models, yeah, it looks great. But I don't see how, if I just pull out some of the other screenshots I saved for this story here, like if I go to this $1,660 laptop, this one here has 2 terabytes. This is a Strix one. It has 2 terabytes of storage, a 4060 165 hertz display, 12 cores, not 8. All of them are big cores, by the way, when it's Strix. And this more expensive Lunar Lake laptop has 16 gigabytes, half the storage, half the RAM. Guys, I'm sorry. Like, if you're going to start running articles saying Strix costs a lot, what does Lunar Lake cost? It clearly costs more.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm across the board just looking at this. I kind of wish most of these were $200 cheaper. I guess the Lenovo I'm looking at has 32 gigs of RAM, so it has that going for it. But we'll see. Also, it looks like a lot of these have somewhat smaller batteries. So if they have smaller,
that's weird to me.
Because
I guess they wanted to be small. I don't know.
This one has a 70 watt hour battery, which I think most
that's
would
pretty
have.
Good.
Okay. Because you can go up to what? Is it 100?
99, I think.
99. Okay. So, okay. I mean, if 70 watt hours is pretty typical, maybe those efficiency gains will be passed on to the end user. But yeah, I don't know what advantages this is going to have in the current market. Like in a vacuum, the CPU looks perfectly good, but
it's not launching into a vacuum here.
Yeah, I hope. I don't know if they're targeting the right price point for this thing.
Well, but guys, Lunar Lake uses 3 nanometer for part of it. It has advanced packaging it's using. It's competing with just a monolithic Strix. And when you consider that, it's like, yeah, I mean, I think really this needs to be $1,000 because it doesn't even beat Hawkpoint in multi-threading. Crushes it in single threading, of course. But, it's relative. By crushing, we mean like 15 to 20% better. We're losing by about that much in multi-threading some of the time. And it's like, well, okay, but if a Hawkpoint system is like 1,000 or 800, probably with similar specs, and then a Lunar Lake one is 1,400, Hawkpoint could get a better battery life if you just give it a bigger capacity battery. So yeah, I don't know. Lunar Lake I like it. It's a solid product, but I gotta say, I don't see how this pricing is that competitive. That is my early opinion on this. Is that it is actually kind of a Strix competitor. Better single threading, worse multi-threading, slightly better battery life, but it costs more. It's there. It's just, it's not going to be paired with any graphics cards. And so really you're going to have to compare it to $1,200 Strix systems. And the $1,200 Strix systems sometimes have 24 gigabytes of RAM, whereas these has 16 gigabytes up to 1,700. I don't know. I remain skeptical on if this is the start of like taking back laptop, but I could be wrong.
Yeah.
QH Freddy writes in, and he says, do you think Intel can pose a threat to AMD's APUs by focusing on laptops with NVIDIA DGPUs to boast their TOPS figures and lean on NVIDIA being a market leader in AI? GPU TOPS have 2 issues, latency and power usage. I don't think that's clearly not their plan right now. So I
we'll
don't
see
know.
With Arrow Lake, maybe they'll go heavy pairing Arrow Lake laptop with NVIDIA GPUs.
But the second they do that, there's going to be, Strix laptops with NVIDIA GPUs. The only advantage I think Intel clearly has here is there's something going on here with OEMs not willing to put more than an 8 gigabyte 4070 laptop chip with Strix, which just seems so silly to me.
Yeah.
Come on, these are 12 cores. Like Asus, give this thing a 4090 laptop chip. Like, what are you doing? And that's where Intel's going to have an advantage, I suspect, with Arrow Lake, is there's going to be a lot of great eventually 5060, 5070 laptops with Strix. But if all the Arrow Lake, if you have to get Arrow Lake to get a 5090, 5080 laptop chip, I don't know. But of course, those aren't the high volume models. So AMD still might take market share, but that's still going to be an asset Intel has, I think. All right. Well, I guess then let us move on from here with story number 5. PS5 Pro revealed with controversial $699 MSRP, but tons of performance. All right, here is the write-up. The PS5 Pro may have been just revealed, but let's be honest. Us at Moore's Law is Dead have known the specs for months. Although it was nice to see Sony vindicate things like exactly 45% raw rendering, 2 to 3 times faster ray tracing, PSSR, and more. And indeed, early hands-on reporting is very impressive. In the last loose ends, yours truly disclosed that the PS5 Pro provides at least 50% more performance, sometimes seemingly double, than the PS5 compared to the PS5 Pro, and that's before you use PSSR. Again, check out that live stream. There's a link slide there. I have a source that show me them next to each other running games at different settings and frame rates. And in fact, on the recent Sacred Symbols Plus podcast, friend of the show, spoke with Colin Moriarty on his podcast, I provided more data live while we were talking from some sources I was speaking with that showed me that the Pro can do 100 hertz plus gaming on the PS5 settings without a problem. See, people, this person, while I was talking to Colin, showed me video. They took the PS5 Pro, which would usually be, dynamically running around, I think the dynamic average resolution seemed to be like 1400p, shifting up to 1600p sometimes, and sometimes down to like 1300p. Around 50 frames per second usually, and they just unlocked the frame rate, and boom, it was over 100 hertz. And that's with zero optimizations. This developer so far has not done anything to optimize for the shaders, the better architecture, anything. They just flipped a switch and it ran twice as good. So this developer told me directly that they have no doubt were they to optimize for the PS5 or certainly turn on PSSR. Yeah, they could probably have here like a 1440 to 1600p 120 hertz locked console, and they want to try 4K more because they think they could just get 4K ultra locked at 60 as well. Meanwhile, CNET stated after their hands-on with the PS5 Pro, quoting here, "As I jump back and forth between the PS5 and the PS5 Pro, I could see the difference. Everything is crisper, more fluid, or both. I prefer to play on the PS5 Pro. With a non-Pro PS5 available for $500 today and likely less during the upcoming holiday sales, I don't know if this sometimes subtle upgrades will be worth the price for many." So they could tell the difference, but they weren't sure many people would care. Digital Foundry, meanwhile, stated that using PSSR to reach 4K 60 like rendering on the PS5 Pro seems to take up much of the extra grunt available on the console. We find similar results in preliminary footage from games like Spider-Man 2 and The Last of Us Part 2, which run at similar or identical base resolutions to the PS5 counterparts in their 60 hertz modes. PSSR upscaling carries a significant frame time cost, as does full resolution post-processing, Judging from the available footage, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth's PS5 Pro upgrade seems very effective. I saw a lot of people saying this. I don't know why Sony in the unveiling showed basically all PS4 remasters. They could have shown Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which those games have shaky frame rates on the console. And they said that when they played that, it felt a lot like what happened when you went from the original Xbox One to the One X, with a just like you're going from 1080p to 4K. They said it was much more stable, obviously higher resolution. And the perceived resolution felt like full 4K. It even felt better than some native 4K games that use TAA, because TAA is so crappy in some games. And so, yeah, the PS5 Pro delivers excellent performance, seemingly the same or arguably a notably better improvement than the PS4 Pro brought almost a decade ago to the PS4. But that price, Sony announced $699 US, $799 EU, $699 British pounds. This is without a doubt higher than expected, especially with no stand or disk drive included. But unfortunately, as pointed out in a recent video by me, it entirely lines up with Xbox Series S to PS5 Slim pricing, a 30% uplift in price for the much better performance. And that's comparing it, of course, to the Xbox Series X 2 terabyte. And so I guess it isn't without explanation what they were thinking. It will be interesting to see how pre-orders go. All right, Dan, this dropped right after we dropped the last podcast, so it falls into this news cycle. But, it should. You should get your chance. You should get a chance to talk about it. I mean, what do you think of the PS5 Pro?
I mean, I was excited for the PS5 Pro, and with that price, I'm a lot less excited for it, I would say. I don't know. I guess I will be waiting to see if I can get it for a lower than $700 price or figure something out.
Or get some deal on how you can get it, you know?
Yeah, because I really don't think it's worth $700 for me. The PS5 base runs games perfectly well. But yeah, having it be like a truly 4K 60 console or even a 120 hertz at a lower resolutions console would be really nice to have.
But by the way, when we say lower resolution, we mean 1440p, 1600p, like still probably pretty good.
Yeah, but the one thing I would also say is the big thing Sony is missing this generation is I don't know what the hell their first party studios are doing. They seem way less active than they have in prior generations. Would have been nice if like this announcement for a PS5 Pro would have been met with some exclusive announcement or something.
I know this is a remaster, but a Bloodborne remaster,
Oh,
the follow up, some Last of Us Factions thing, or Ghost of Tsushima 2, showing that off, some truly new game, or like something that we've all wanted to see. I mean,
the Bloodborne subreddit has been going insane about the lack of a of a remaster or remake for Bloodborne yet. They're like,
you know, that's like a joke between me and Colin Moriarty. Like I even said it on the podcast. It's just like, hey, by the way, Colin, where's the Bloodborne remaster? And he's just like, I don't know.
The game that famously ran perfectly on the PS4.
The one that you would want to remaster the most, and everyone I know who's in the know, including me, says is something they worked on. I don't know where it is, but that would have been a great way to reveal the Pro.
Yeah, and a remaster, it's not like a full new game. Just say, yeah, here's the remaster. It's coming out alongside the PS5 Pro.
Dude, that's such a missed opportunity. That would have sold consoles. And so a lot of people, I think this is fair criticism. Again, bringing it up again, I brought this up to Colin Moriarty when I was on Sacred Symbols Plus. He said, what do you think about the games they showed off? And I said, name me 4 games that they should have shown off. And he said, I don't know, God of War Ragnarok. That's on PS4. I said, it's hard to come up with 4 games that aren't on PS4 that they could even show off.
Sony really is having a hard time getting out of the PS4 era, and I don't really get it at this point. Although, to be fair, there were a bunch of whiny assholes early on when the PS5 and Series X came out that were saying releasing games exclusive to the PS5 or Series X is anti-consumer. So, I mean, I guess this is what we asked for this generation. But I don't know. I really feel like the PS4 is holding the PS5 back, and I don't know where their first-party studios are. Maybe it would be more enthusiastic if they had more first-party games or exclusives that had come out on the PS5 this generation. I mean, I don't regret like the PS5 at all because it's just such a better experience than the PS4. But Jesus, they don't want to leave the PS4 behind for some reason.
Well, no, and this is something I brought up again to Colin on Sacred Symbols Plus, because at the Sacred, if you go listen to the last episode of Sacred Symbols, they genuinely were like, they were all floored. Like Colin said, he woke up his wife early because she just heard him yell in the bathroom, 700. and that's a genuine story. He's like, and then he had to apologize. She was mad at him for the day. I hate it when people wake me up, though. I'm a light sleeper too, probably. But ultimately on their podcast, they were all like, but for the price, it's not that bad. And I agree. And I think that's a fair point. It isn't. And I know there's people in the comments, you can build a PC. No, you can't. Get out of here. It's what you're getting for the price is good still compared to PC. My criticism of Sony, though, is I don't know that they get that half of their user base is on PS4, and they're not going to fucking upgrade Sony until you have a notably below 400. What do I mean? If I say below 400, people are going to say, you mean 399? No, I mean like 369 or something, or like something like that, where it's like adjusted for inflation. This kind of feels like the PS3 hitting 299. I think 369 personally, because then if you add the disk drive, it's 450. So it's finally a real price drop for the other ones, and also that's like 10% more money than the Series S. Which I'm sorry, people listening, I'm sympathetic to the argument that why would we charge the same price as a Series S? Even though we're the Series S to be $250, I think Sony would consider dropping it to $350. But until they do that, or if they would have had the Pro for $500 with no disk drive, something to get the PS4 Pro people, the PS4 people to upgrade. They're waiting to see that price. And until they do, you're holding back development on these and support for these truly next-gen games. And I think that's a mistake, especially if Sony starts to feel like how Xbox did near the end of the 360 gen, where they kind of got too arrogant, didn't pay enough service to their fans. They didn't have to necessarily, but like, give us a piece of candy here. One piece. Give us a piece of candy every now and then. Like, I understand you're going to charge more than you otherwise need to because Microsoft really isn't competing, but like, just put it that little bit 619 so the disk drive with it becomes 700, something like that, so that it doesn't entirely feel like you don't care anymore, because that will keep the momentum going for your future and for better support. That will make people switch to PS5 quicker, so more people buy more PS5 games, so devs want to focus on next gen more. I feel like that's a missed opportunity. That's hard to quantify.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I guess this is what looks like when there really isn't a competitor. Like, Sony just doesn't have that much of a direct competitor for consoles these days. Like, Xbox really just isn't competing. I don't know.
Yeah. But again, I keep making this point. It's not just about it. People say, well, they're only competing with themselves. Right. But if there was only one car company, no one would buy a base model for $200,000. They would all just get on motorcycles to ride the bus. Like, and I think Sony needs to come to terms with, when you say, oh, you're competing with yourself. Yes, but you are competing with yourself. And you should take that do that little bit more, so they go to PS5 and pay you $70 for each game. Why aren't you doing this? It just seems silly to me. In terms of performance, though, I mean, that's the one thing I think people are underestimating, is that it actually does look to deliver quite an uplift, more than than the specs would suggest. Don't you think?
Yeah.
So, and I think maybe, Sony looked at the sales of the PS4 Pro, and I think it's like 10 to 15% of all PS4 sales were the Pro. And I think Sony may have looked at that, and they have the data somewhere. They must. I mean, because if you sign it on a PS4 and then sign it on a PS4 Pro, they know this percent of people bought the Pro that already had a 4. And I'm guessing Sony looked at the data, and they're like 90% of PS4 Pro owners upgraded from a base PS4. So we can make this $700 because these are all going to be the hardcore fans that do it anyways. Or that's what they're betting. We're going to find out once pre-orders go live later this week if that's true.
I mean, yeah, I'm assuming most. I don't think this is going to convince anybody that's still on a base PS4 to upgrade to the PS5. This is all going to be PS5, previous PS5 owners, or who knows, maybe you get some PC players that are like, screw it, let's try this out now, because it's actually good performance versus a PC.
It's funny. I did see some hot takes online that were like, to be fair, we have spent the past month talking about how Windows 11 can't run correctly. So,
True.
I mean, that's just a giant marketing push for console over PC. And maybe they saw that as well. I don't know. All Jesse wants is for Maurice to play with her more often. But unfortunately, he just does not give out playtime or kisses for as low of a rate as she does. And I think she's just going to have to deal with that. But do you know what you don't have to deal with? Paying too much for Microsoft software if you go to CDkeyoffer.com. This piece of content is sponsored by CDkeyoffer.com and their back to school sale. Whether it's Microsoft operating systems, Office products, or even many of the latest games, CDkeyoffer.com provides PC gamers with a product this community deserves. Amongst endlessly elevating component costs, fair pricing on Microsoft keys is one thing that we at least should get, I think. And the Moore's Law is Dead team has been working with CDkeyoffer.com for a very long time. And that's because they're good to me, good to Dan, good to about a dozen family members of friends of mine that have used their services. And they've been really, really good, most importantly, to the Moore's Law is Dead community. So support this channel by using offer code BrokenSilicon to save 25% off Microsoft software, or you can also use Die Shrink to save 3% off everything else on the website like games. Using either of those codes really helps the channel a ton, and it helps save you money. So use those codes BrokenSilicon and Die Shrink at CDkeyoffer.com today. Bullethead writes in and says, good news, Tom. Adam Patrick Murray of the Full Nerd podcast also calls PSSR pisser.
That's good.
Well, we all should. It should be called PSR or PSSSR because they're missing an S for the normal abbreviation. It's ridiculous. Why not just PSR?
I don't know, Tom.
I mean, why the two S's? Why we gotta... Rag Kusakis writes in and says, hey, Tom, do you think the failure of Xbox to compete with a serious console is what allowed Sony to simply not care anymore about price competitiveness? At 800 euros without a standard disc, it seems absurd. It's asking, is it just that? I would suggest it's not just that. I think they have data that suggests to them they can get away with this. But were the 2 terabyte Series X to be 500, were the digital Series X to be 400 and the Series S to be 250, it's hard for me to believe they wouldn't have been more aggressive.
Yeah, they probably would have had to have been then in that situation, but still could have easily gotten away with like $600, which I guess is what I think everyone was hoping for, was 600.
Mm-hmm. I was hoping for lower, but clearly wrong this time. Aiden writes in, the PS4 Pro was around 15% of lifetime PS4 sales. Will Sony be able to reach that sales ratio with this steep $700 price tag on the digital PS5 Pro? Well, first of all, let's drop the digital nonsense. They're all digital, and you can add a disk drive. I don't think we have to qualify that anywhere. That's clearly the direction. I'm guessing PS6 will support disk drives, but won't come with one. But what were you going to say?
I mean, I would guess it's going to be a smaller percentage of PS5 sales than the PS5 Pro was for the PS4.
Mm-hmm. I would too, but actually the bigger reason I would suggest it's coming out 4 years after the base console launched, not 3 years. It was 2016 was when the PS4 Pro launched, and then 4 years later, 4 years later, 2020 is when the PS5 launched. So I would suggest this is launching, this year, 2024. And 3 to 4 years later, I just think because of that reason, it might not be as high of a percentage. And I think Sony knows that. And that's also why they're charging more because, if they're 10% instead of 15% of the sales, still might be 10 million consoles sold, whatever. I think they're maybe fine with that. But we're going to have to find out because I will say this too before we close out this story. Everyone I speak to in the know in retail and just sources of mine, these aren't people who are fortune tellers, but their opinions, I think, are pretty well informed. They all seem to think it's going to sell out. So do you think it will sell
out? I mean, if everybody thinks that it's going to, I suppose so. I don't know what the stock is going to be. Whether or not it's going to sell out on day one is more of a matter of if they've calibrated expectations with production correctly.
Because I've seen a lot of people in the Moore's Law said Discord, or at least a couple people who are very vocal, say, and no one's going to buy it. And I'm sitting here going, I don't know that no one's going to buy it, dude. It is only $100 more than that $600 joke, the 2 terabyte Series X.
If there's availability of 10 million the day it comes out, I don't think it's selling out. If there's availability of, I don't know, 500,000, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. My gut tells me it probably will. I'm just saying, I think people are underestimating that. It's more than we wanted. I think it's a mistake for pretty specific reasons about bringing the last gen forward and maintaining momentum. But I do think it's probably going to sell out. But we'll see. If it doesn't, that'll be very interesting. And that will finally signal that people are not just going to eat whatever you throw at them. But again, it also might mean that they made a ton of them. So that'll take more than just a day's worth of data to analyze that. I do want to throw in here a last minute addendum. The source did get back to me about the Lunar Lake volume, a retail source. And so far, all indications are Lunar Lake might not have a ton of availability when it comes out when this podcast is dropping. But, we'll save that for another piece of content to evaluate that. Because for now, we have to move on to story number 6. Nintendo Switch prototype chassis leaked. Nintendo seems to have paid the price for delaying the Switch's successor, and that it seems like by now complete specs and even CAD files for the upcoming console have been leaked. The new device is significantly larger, and the design files supposedly include a dual fan setup for cooling. Meanwhile, the battery space is quite small, far from the cavernous battery enclosures of PC handhelds and even laptops. Along with the significantly more powerful chip, this lends credence for information leaked by this channel in several videos at the beginning of this year and was re-explained actually in a video last week that the Switch 2, yes, it doesn't have a giant battery, but it is targeting to run at very, very low clocks on the go, maybe consuming around 5 watts versus the Switch consuming, I don't know, 8 to 12 watts, whatever it is. But it, then when you dock it, the cooling turns on and it gets a significant performance boost. So I think, again, I think there's some misunderstandings about the battery life, because if they use 40% less energy than the original Switch and then also have a 25% larger battery, maybe you actually get double the battery life. It's just they don't want it to use the fan or something while you're on the go. But anyways, that said, the CAD files may have been modified or fabricated. We can never be 100% sure if these are completely legit. But as per the leak, it looks legit to me personally. And the Switch 2 seems to have 12 gigabytes of LPDDR5X, like this channel leaked, bandwidth of 120 gigabytes per second. And so some people were hoping for more capacity, but it should be noted that that is 3 times the capacity and almost 5 times the bandwidth of the original Switch. This is good indication for the console, and it should be a godsend for developers when they no longer have to contend with Switch's pitiful 4 gigabytes of DDR4. If only Nintendo would have launched it far sooner. And that is a big point to end on, is like, were this to have launched a year or two ago when I'm told it could have, I think the specs would have been very impressive to people. But the longer this takes to come out, the more it's like, is this, I mean, it might end up competing. It will, I'm sure, at some point end up competing with the Steam Deck too. I don't know. It's better than last gen, relatively speaking, but it doesn't feel like what it could have felt like.
Yeah. I mean, I think Nintendo's content with not really pushing the boundaries of performance that much, because the games they design don't really require it, I guess. Yeah, it would have been nicer to see something. Well, it would have been nice to see this sooner, because this today kind of just looks, like Nintendo always looks. They're always way behind on the tech. And I guess they sell like gangbusters. So Nintendo is laughing their way to the bank like, oh no, who cares? And I'm sure this will sell well, assuming that it has good battery life and they have a good series of first-party games that come out on it.
Yeah. The two things that I would just say is, do I think this will be able to run AAA and third-party games better than the Switch did when it came out? I do. Yeah. I do. And the reason I do is, let's make a comparison. I believe the original Switch, off the top of my head, launched in 2017. That's after the PS4 Pro was even out. I mean, guys, the comparison you would make is the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One had 8 gigabytes of RAM. Okay. And then the Switch had 4. So it had half as much. Now it's launching, I guess, early 2025, it seems. And, that's well into the console life cycle, but kind of at a similar point, maybe a little later, but it has 12 gigabytes compared to 16. It has 2/3 the RAM of the current gen consoles instead of half the RAM. And with that in mind, it actually even has more RAM than the Series S. So I still look at the Switch 2 as, or hopefully the Super Switch, I think that's the better name. And I go, I think this is enough that any game they put on the Series S, they can put on this, whereas every game they put on the Xbox One Slim, they could not put on the Switch.
Yeah, at a minimum, at least this has enough RAM. Although, wow, that is a very low bandwidth.
Not the worst, I don't think, either.
It's very low bandwidth, memory bandwidth, though.
I think that, isn't that more than the Steam Deck, though?
Oh, it might be.
And it's certainly more than the Xbox Split Memory Series S. Yeah, it is. It's almost 50% more bandwidth than the Steam Deck. This is what I'm getting at, people. This is almost 50% more bandwidth than the Steam Deck. It has a stronger GPU than the Steam Deck. This is going to run games better than a lot of the haters are saying. It's just, it would have been more impressive if it came out a year ago. I mean, because when it was conceived of, when I was talking to people at NVIDIA that were excited about it, I was like, oh man, if this launches like I thought it could have, I was told even in 2023, people would have been like, whoa, this is better than the Steam Deck. Cheaper, probably same price actually, is the Steam Deck. CPU is a little weaker for gaming, but I don't know how much CPU processing power Mario requires. I thought it would have been very impressive, but I don't know. So I'm still of two minds about it. Ultimately, it's odd how long this is taking to come out for me. At the same time, this is better than the previous gen for sure. It's just
Yeah.
not. It's funny. It's better in terms of AAA gaming, but actually the original Switch kind of was the strongest gaming handheld. So it's weird how it's not the strongest gaming handheld when it comes out, but it is probably better, relatively speaking, at running AAA games, because just at the time, the Switch was competing with like Atom APUs. I mean,
Yeah. And the original Switch made no real effort to be a AAA gaming machine. So, and this, I mean, obviously that's not the first thing that this is meant for, but it should run everything.
It should, or at least most things. I think its CPU could run into some trouble, but I'd be surprised if they couldn't get them running at like 30 frames at least. All right, let us then. Oh wait, what do I even do for this one? I don't know. I guess I'll just do the default background with story number 7. iPhone 16 revealed, launched, and tested. Apple's new generation of iPhones has launched to thunderous applause, block long queues, including I saw in Moscow, which apparently there's not allowed to sell them there. I guess they definitely are getting them, as possibly the most successful consumer launch for AI-enabled devices yet, even though the AI, that is Apple Intelligence, isn't even out yet, with first features coming in October in the full announced suite to be rolled out through 2025, as per Bloomberg. Quoting CBS News, the new iPhones come preloaded with iOS 18, Apple's latest software upgrade. Contrary to earlier reports, however, iOS 18 does not include artificial intelligence enhancements at all at launch. Instead, Apple Intelligence will begin with iOS 18.1, set to arrive in October, according to Apple. According to PC Mag here, according to our results, the A18 Pro is on average about 10% better than the A18 on the benchmarks we assessed. Not a huge difference. The 18 Pro clearly outshines the A18 in terms of GPU performance, though, which matters most in applications like gaming and media creation. This aligns with Apple's marketing, which pitches the iPhone Pro models as creator phones and the regular iPhones for regular peasants. Quoting Mr. Mac Wright, who did some testing, he said, "Is it going to replace your gaming console or Switch or Steam Deck? Probably not. It's not there yet, but it is a step in the right direction. A cursory look at the benchmarks show that running the AAA game, Assassin's Creed Mirage, on the iPhone, I didn't know that was on the iPhone. That's interesting. It ran at 30 frames per second locked and like 645p with high graphics. Death Stranding runs around 30 frames per second in 720p. Kind of blurry, though, apparently. The RE4 remake, again, 720p, 30 frames per second, a little blurry. Resident Evil Village, 720p, 45 frames per second, 55 to 60 and low. Alien Isolation actually seems to look good running around 60 to 40 frames per second. So I don't know. Seems kind of like a 1600p, 30 frames per second medium gaming phone, which on the one hand is not a gaming handheld. On the other hand, it is interesting that it's running like Assassin's Creed Mirage, at playable settings on a phone. It's kind of interesting. I feel like you need that extra 50%, though, to where I would give me to 60 1080p so I can plug it into my TV. That would be an interesting phone.
But how well does it run Candy Crush, Tom? That's the real
probably
question.
at 8,000 frames per second. But so what is your reaction to the iPhone? I mean, there's some gaming here. This is a major release for gaming hardware and tech for a lot of people. I think we have to cover it. What do you think of it?
Yeah, I mean, phones are starting to really be able to play AAA games, albeit very, very hampered settings.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's cool to see. I mean, I don't think I'm going to be getting this because I just got a new phone, but yeah, it looks good. I love seeing the push of AI and everything, and congrats to Bella Ramsey for her huge paycheck for this advertising campaign.
Yeah. I think my hot take for this is one that I've heard from some other people that I agree with, which is I think this is just a sign they have fucking nothing to show, personally. I mean, that's as harsh. And we are not a channel that has always hated on Apple. That's something you just do for extra clicks in the gaming hardware space, it feels like. But when I look at this, it's 10% better in performance, and all they talk about is AI, and it doesn't have AI at launch. That's because they know it has no reason to buy it. Yet, selling out. Lines around the block, even in countries where it's allegedly banned. Like, no, everyone can't get enough of this. So who am I to be judgmental? It's doing fine. But at the same time, I look at this and I go, This really feels so iterative. This feels like Ivy Bridge over Sandy Bridge at best.
Yeah, I wish I was seeing like there's like maybe there is this to some extent like exit polling for people that just bought an app like an Apple the new iPhone. Like, what motivated you to get this? Like, why did you get this? Is the 16, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
16. Why did you choose to get this instead of the 15? Was it like, is it because it's AI? Is it just like, well, I get a new iPhone every 3 releases, or is it, well, I didn't get the iPhone 15 because of the disastrous launch? Like, I'm curious why most people decided to get this instead of waiting or getting an iPhone 15 a year prior.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Wasn't there an iPhone launch where they didn't even really give it a new CPU?
Oh, well, I mean, the iPhone 15, and I don't remember if this is the standard, but with the iPhone 15, the 15 standard just got the 14 Pro's CPU.
Right. So you got to wonder if like that's why they're upgrading now, because it is technically a new one. And like you said, exit polling, this was when they did the people who usually wait 2 to 3 years, maybe a lot of them skipped the last one because it was literally not a new CPU. And now, even though it's almost not a new one, if we're being honest, they're doing it now. Now is when they're upgrading.
Well, Tom, if the 15, 28 years later, Tom, was filmed on an iPhone 15. So if it's not good enough for Danny Boyle, I mean, if it's good enough for Danny Boyle, I think it's good enough for you.
Can't argue with that.
With, I'm sure, a completely unmodified lens. I'm sure there isn't like a $10,000 lens attached to it.
Or something like that, you know. All right, let us move on to the wrap up here. These are the stories that we don't think deserved a full conversation, but at least deserve a mention. So yeah, this could have been a story, but we actually had a lot of little ones, so I decided not to do that. But this has a main one. But inter-core latency for Ryzen 9000 has allegedly been reduced by like, what is it? Like 100%, like 180 nanoseconds to what was it, like 70 something? Like, good Lord.
Like more than half. Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious. This was just on one set of motherboards, wasn't it? Or just on Asus motherboards, if I'm remembering correctly?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, it lowers the latency. So this would suggest this new AGESA is coming out and fixes the latency issue. What's interesting is early testing I've seen doesn't show a consistent, huge improvement. I think we need more, though. And it'll probably drop based on our luck the day we put this out. But
yeah, I'm sure there's going to be more testing over time. But I just think this speaks to AMD released this too early. Once again, that seems to be the major through line of Zen 5 is, why did you release it so early?
I don't know, damn. AMD adds in driver VRAM customizations for Strix, so you don't need to do it in the BIOS. Don't have much to say about that. That's a nice feature.
Yeah.
This other one here, this really could have been its own story, I think, because, you know, it was a leak out of this channel. This is the Arrow Lake single threading Cinebenchmark score I put out, which I think pretty firmly suggests, once you account for clock speed, which it was only clocked, I believe, kind of bouncing between lower 4 to 4.5 gigahertz. It seems like it will beat Zen 5 potentially in Cinebench by 10 to 15%, which that's not gaming, but that does tell me that there's a decent chance Arrow Lake firmly beats Zen 5. I don't know about firmly beat Zen 5 base in gaming, I think. Probably. I'm not 100% sure, but I think they'll get at least a narrow one there. And there's a narrow chance it could even trade blows with 7800 X3D or beat it. And it led me to saying, I do think that if AMD really keeps dragging their feet on
this could get away from them. Yeah.
If they don't launch the Vcache models of Zen 5 this year, there may be a few months where Intel has the crown.
Yeah, and to the extent that matters at this point is debatable, but yeah, AMD does need to get the 9800 X3D out the door as soon as they can. Obviously, assuming that it works, don't just put it out to put it out. But yeah, I mean, that's what we would expect out of Arrow Lake, is that it's going to be very good at single threading, and it's probably going to be pretty good at gaming.
Well, I will say, everybody, warning, it still depends who you ask. I mean, there are still some sources I have at Intel that are like, I don't know if it will even beat Raptor Lake by more than 5%. But if it does beat it by 7%, that's enough to tie the 7800X 3D. If that's enough to be interesting to anyone, though, I still think that's an honest question, though, Dan. Like, let's even say it's the best case scenario. Let's say Arrow Lake manages to beat the 7800X 3D by 5% in gaming. If the 7800X 3D is 330 and the 7600X 3D is like 250, does anyone care?
Probably not.
You know,
I personally don't care. I still think the 7800X 3D is the gaming CPU to get.
So I don't know, but I thought that if you missed that video, everybody, there's new Arrow Lake information in there. Also, UDNA was announced. I don't believe I spoke about this to you yet. Really, did I? I mean, maybe offline. But I think this is actually fairly big news. I put out a short about it that was, I believe, taken from the loose ends. About AMD has announced that UDNA is coming after RDNA and CDNA. They're merging it back into one architecture in a few years, just like they did with GCN. And there were some people like, well, this is stupid. Why can't they focus on gaming? And I'm like, guys, this is the only way you're getting high-end Radeon graphics cards again. Because how could they justify that with GCN? Because they were trying to sell them to the professional market anyways. Vega was used in professional and gaming. It wasn't perfect, but it kept market share much better than what they're doing right now. And AMD doesn't have the money, I think, to do both. And so why would they make some card sense. They can sell for $1,500 to gamers? Because they know they can sell it for $5,000 to professional users. And if they don't have that ability to sell it into AI for that price, why would they bother making a high-end card at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the lesson that AMD has to keep learning is they can't spin too many plates. So merging them together into one architecture makes sense. Yeah.
Let's just hope it turns out well. AI Meable Chief, you see, QH Freddy, he says it it makes sense. It's easier to say. I guess he's saying QH Friday is what he. No, you got try again. But anyways, yes. Does AMD have a plan to keep gamers happy? I get 1 or 2 generations of needing to be purely mid-range with your offerings, but does an eventual UDNA high-end SKU automatically imply GPU chiplets will be viable enough to meet the kind of flexibility the do-it-yourself retail segment so desperately needs? Well, yes, because they can share the chiplets between high-end and gaming. That is the asset that AMD's had this whole time with Ryzen, is they can share chiplets between several segments, thus making it worth it to make a 16-core desktop chip. That's what this might allow them to do. They really could. They didn't share these chiplets with anything in MI, I believe. All they did with the MI like 300 is share chiplets with Epic and Ryzen for the CPU, the models that had CPU cores. So yeah, I think this makes it much more viable to do that. Do you expect a change in the naming numbering of AMD's GPUs post UDNA, or will they still follow expected progression into the 8000, 9000 series and so on? Oh, I mean, RDNA 4's 8000 series. Maybe there's a refresh or RDNA 5's 9000. I'm going to guess when they go to UDNA, they're starting over their naming scheme. I mean, they love doing that at Radeon.
They love doing it, and I'm again pushing them. Go for 100,000 this time.
Just go all the way up there.
Go for 1 million even. Do you know how much bigger that is
than NVIDIA?
NVIDIA's whatever they'll be on like 7,000 or 8,000. Like that is the
over
innovation
10
I think
times
they need.
Better. Yeah. Also, this was kind of big news. Again, it's not a story for a reason, though, because I don't know much there's to say about it. AI enhanced FSR4 has been confirmed by AMD. They say they've basically been working on it for a year. It will leverage hardware acceleration. It's like, yeah, but I think I've leaked that they were doing this years ago. I'm sure other people did too. Sony's using hardware acceleration for Pisser. I don't think this is a surprise to anyone.
No, I mean, AMD's obviously been working on or had plans to be working on this since they've announced FSR. At least I hope they have. And hopefully that brings FSR to parity with all of the other upscaling technologies.
Yeah, I think this is one of the ones I added before the script was done, but U.S. government pushes Intel nodes. This could kind of be looped in with that first story we did. But, it's funny that this all seemed to happen around the same time. Intel they're like, hey, you guys should be using Intel nodes more. Then all of a sudden Intel makes IFS a subsidiary and gets more funding from the government. So I don't know. There's not really much surprise there. The U.S. government's pushing more people to use Intel in America. But at the same time, I would say to the government, you guys are aware one of their most cutting edge nodes is actually in Ireland, and that they aren't using their own nodes themselves. And also, you can use Intel nodes, but everything else in the iPhone comes from China. So I don't know.
Yeah,
To me, this feels like a stupid tone deaf. They don't get the market thing from the government.
Well, yeah, that there's been a lot of that in the news recently, but
Yes.
yeah, Intel isn't exactly doing a great advertisement for IFS by manufacturing on TSMC.
Yeah. The Chinese-made Arrow Lake. HK, let's see, HK distributor runs out of replacements. Oh, yeah, so this was interesting. Just a little snippet here. In Hong Kong, a distributor of 14900 KSs cannot replace them anymore because Intel cannot supply enough of them to them. This is something, by the way, that's worth bringing up because I hear this from all retailers. Like, this is a huge problem. You're probably not going to get your exact CPU that you sent in for RMA to Intel right now. They might give you a newer one, a better one, but then they just don't have the supply. Again, like I think we said this last time we talked. This is something that's going to keep coming up. I know we're kind of bored of talking about the Intel instability issues, and there's not much more to say. It's still happening in the background. There are still hundreds of thousands of these things breaking, costing Intel money. Retailers and system integrators are furious.
Oh yeah, it's gonna keep going until Arrow Lake comes out, and I'm curious how fast they're gonna just transition right to Arrow Lake, and we're not making these at all anymore. This is done, or selling these at all, because they'll still have to make them to, or at least warehouse them to some extent to keep up with all of the breaking CPUs they have.
And I don't know. I put this in here. Sapphire Rapids refresh. So the Emerald Rapids edition is finally getting reviewed now near the end of the year, despite launching sooner. And yeah, I don't know. From what I've heard, I know Wendell has a review. I'll be a link in the description. I'll also say I talked to some people behind the scenes. Seems pretty consistently like the thing is actually 10 to 20% faster because it just clocks so much better while using 10 to 20% less energy at the same time and way less amperage spikes. So if you wanted a Intel workstation, Sapphire Rapids refresh is the one that works. But it does work. It is kind of a generational uplift because of how power hungry and really just not safe the original Sapphire Rapids workstation chips were.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't look too deeply into the review. I didn't have that much time, but I don't know. Wendell seemed enthusiastic about it too. So, if you need a workstation, I would say watch that review.
And I will say, I do continue to hear that, like, in a lot of workloads, with how much AMD's charging for Threadripper at this point, like, there's actually a lot of people where Sapphire Rapids refresh for the price would actually work if you want a workstation. It'd actually be a decent option. TMC Paint writes him, says, howdy, can this industry just stop using the term IPC in any context? Nobody is benchmarking instructions per clock of an architecture when they say IPC. They're benchmarking performance per clock or performance at a given clock speed in some sample of programs. So performance per clock, not IPC. IPC is a valid measurement, but actually quantifying instructions throughput for a microarchitecture at an extremely low level is a really specific type of test. This metric doesn't translate to performance in the type of applications us consumers care about half the time anyways as well. Yeah. I think too, I'll say, I feel like Alder Lake and Zen 3 taught us the wrong lessons because like they actually like linearly did add that level of performance to gaming. In fact, I believe Zen 3 added more gaming performance per clock on average than the IPC uplift was an uplift. So I think people saw that and they're like, that's IPC. It's always going to be that. And they're missing that like half of the time IPC hasn't been the uplift that it's been touted to be.
Oh yeah, I know. And yeah,
at least for gaming or something.
What's always being tested is performance per clock. He is correct. No one's measuring IPC in any review. And it feels to me like it's just probably a vestige from some era of testing that we have never gotten away from actually using the wrong term and started using the correct one. Yeah.
Yeah, performance per clock, PPC, Pipsy, have a cup of Pipsy. That's probably what we should be saying.
Yeah.
Nothing to say with my ridiculous trying to goad you. Yeah, trying to goad you into being annoyed with me. Nothing?
Nope.
Huba writes in, I would wager RDNA for ray tracing would match the 4060 Ti at best. How much?
Yeah, I'll take that trade.
I'll take that's an old drop in I think Age of Empires 3. I'll take that trade. Yeah, I no, I don't know where this comes from, and I saw Huba on the Discord saying, well, an overdrive performance in Cyberpunk. I'm like, well, that's not all of the ray tracing. That's one app built by NVIDIA to make AMD look stupid. So no, it's going to crush the 4060 Ti in ray tracing, guys. I mean, no, I've everything I'm hearing is, and you look at the PS5 Pro, it's getting 2 to 3 times the ray tracing performance. There you go, guys. That's RDNA 4. It'll just be interesting to see that we might, depending on if RDNA 4 comes out this year, which unfortunately, this might come out in a video this week, everybody. I'm kind of hearing that it's maybe getting pushed back again. Like, be interesting if the only way to test RDNA 4 ray tracing this year is to test a PS5 Pro, but that looks like that might be happening. We'll see. But anyways, on that little nugget at the end, I think that's going to do it for this episode. As usual, I want to thank everybody for watching, for listening. Like it, share it, comment down below for the algorithm. And please join the Moore's Law is Dead YouTube channel. Subscribing to that and ringing the bell button helps so much with the algorithm and gets us recommended more so we can get more funding to make more content for you. The best way to support us, of course, is to support us on Patreon. New Die Shrink just dropped. So if you want more content from us, it's right there. No ads, never any ads. There's hundreds of these bonus pieces of content. Of course, you can ask us questions. We'll have another guest episode coming up soon. Yeah, I think that's everything. Dan, do you have any final words?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, well, have a good week, everybody.
Bye.
This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carmen Cry and Carrie Nosugada as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the About/Support page in the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Carrie Nosugada as well. You can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Law is Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content truly possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and Jean-Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong. We love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans, much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guest questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey, if you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family, and on social media and websites like Reddit, and give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels: Brad Medlin, Drita Fools, Z-Jits, Daniel D, Aaron Close, Deke, Jan Rauner, Nicholas Buckner, Daniel Hyde, GZ Ziggy, MJB1, SNES Chalmers, Jem Ferreira, Valcom Alev, Jensen Wang, Gregory S. Acker, Sarcastro, Toka, Chris Strix, Compressed AI Blocks, 3DS Boy 08, Hal Booma, Shredbird, Holden Mobley, Sammy Malas, Jordan Simkovic, Julian Leak, The Boss Haas, Jonathan, Franco Frederic, Jake223, Jake Martin, Chrysantine, Slicky, Stephen Hart, Meat and Pork, Tim Robb, Ian Clifford, Neith Rezink, Travis Gooding, Mad, Zutsu Taylor, Stephen Coates, Greg, Michael McGee, Patty Cakes, Gamers Unite, Amiable Chief, Mark Mitchell, Tommy, Ishad, Mark Raidmaker, James Anderson, Cole Addict, Cameron, Henry Zhang, Wesley Sager, Michelle Pell, Jamie Witters, Hexapuma, Reginald Ari, Teak Autumn, Mai Sharona, Jeff Sedler, Windstar, Corey Leonard, James I. Raider, JSMH, Little Germany, Shay, Milton, Winwang, Melodic Warrior, Brett Jones, Chuck Glidden, McDaffie, Stephen Dick, Dave Schultz, Hodgson Haggerty, Joe Foot, Brian Scanlon, Hardland, Jansen Angima, Joseph Kelly, Slushbot, Himsa Gunn, Tails2299, Mealval, Virga, Sisyphos7771, The Forbidden Juice, RB Racer, Brian Wright, Gian Violi, AC, Alex Vega, Dr. J. Mad, Free D, Michael Cozy, John Swin, Christopher Cho, Elbert Gunn, Kikum, Solarized 80, Thalo215, Jeffrey Gentleman, Matthew Marlows, Lord Starscream, Brian P, Hudat42, Sprutnik, Vigoff, Higuk, Cornstar 671, Penta Winter, Hal Richard, Angel of Cake, Omega Doge, Mr. Tiger, John Wick Boomstick, Porcelain Oats, Curry King 3, Nick Zizmania, Sakosha, Ivalez, Armand Vakatora, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.